Welcome. My name is Dr. Bob Wilson, and I'm Professor of Church History at Acadia Divinity College. And this is the second in our series of interviews with the Reverend Dr. Millard Cherry, former principal of Acadia Divinity College and professor of theology at both the School of Theology and Acadia Divinity College. Dr. Cherry, it's good to have you with us, and I wonder if we can pick up our theme where we left off in the last interview. One of the things that we didn't talk about was when you became the Dean of Theology of the university.
I became acting Dean of Theology in August of 1943.
63?
1963, thank you. That 43 would have been before I graduated from college. An interesting thing happened in connection to that. Dr. Whidden was having a serious problem with his eyesight and had to retire as dean, and it was always coming up close to the natural time for retirement in any event. I was recommended to the administration for the position of Dean of Theology. Dr. Longley was acting in the president's position at the time. I believe that Dr. Kirkconnell was ill. Dr. Longley called me in and said that they wanted to offer me the position of acting Dean of Theology, and that with all likelihood then that I would be named Dean of Theology. I told Dr. Longley that the Dean of Theology, or any dean in the university, needed to be a married person because of all the necessity for entertaining and that sort of thing. And I went on to say, I don't have anything against marriage, but I will not get married in order to be Dean of Theology. In any event, I was made the acting Dean of Theology in August of 63 until December of 63, at which time I was made Dean of Theology in Acadia University. And I served in that capacity then until such time as we became Acadia Divinity College and continued as Dean of Theology, because remember I told you that the charter requires that or I believe I did, the charter, in any event, the charter of Acadia Divinity College requires that the principal of Acadia Divinity College be the Dean of Theology in Acadia University. So I continued in that position until I retired as Dean in 1973.
Now, one of the first tasks facing you when Acadia Divinity College was founded was that you not only had been the School of Theology, but a number of people had retired. You had to begin building a new faculty. Allison Trites had arrived on faculty.
Yes.
Before that time. Tell us about that faculty as it began as Acadia Divinity College.
Well, let's go back to Allison Trites before that. I realized that it was virtually impossible for one man to teach all the Old Testament and all the New Testament, plus the languages that were required for a Bachelor of Divinity degree. So I went to Dr. Kirkconnell with a request, in spite of the woeful financial condition of the university, to request for another professor in the Department of Biblical Literature in the School of Theology. I also took the liberty to go talk to Dr. Frank Eaton, longtime secretary of the board. Well, to my great joy, they approved the recommendation, and we began to search for a professor of New Testament. At that time, Allison Trites was working on his doctorate in London, at Oxford, and I recommended him, and he was appointed to the Faculty of Theology. About the same time that we were becoming Acadia Divinity College, we needed to fill the position of church history that had been vacated by Dr. Whidden. Dr. Whidden had returned to teach for a year or two after retirement. I recommended Dr. Jerry Zeman to the then Board of Trustees to the Board of Governors of Acadia University and the Interim Board of Trustees of Acadia Divinity College, and he was really the first appointment that the Acadia Divinity College Board of Trustees made to the faculty. Both of those proved to be singularly good appointments, and I take considerable pride in the fact that it was on my recommendation that they were made members of the faculty.
Right. Now, soon after that, Dr. Osberg also came on the scene.
Yes. Dr. Langley recruited Dr. Osberg. Dr. Osberg proved to be a very valuable member of our faculty, one of the most cooperative persons with whom I've worked in all of my tenure at Acadia.
Right. During those years when you were dean and vice principal or associate principal, it was a turbulent time in the midst of the convention. What kind of student body was coming to you? Because the numbers had been quite low through the early 60s and then began to build. How did you cope then with those changes in numbers and the flavor of students? Was it different? And tell us a little bit about what that was like.
When I came, most of the students in theology had been pre-theology students at Acadia University, and the Dean of Theology had been responsible for them from the time they entered Acadia University until they graduated with their theology degree. All of that changed through the years. After we became a college in our own right, students began coming from many, many schools, and it was not long until students who had done their undergraduate work at Acadia would be very much in a minority. After Dr. Langley became principal, but while I was still doing the dean's work under the title Associate Dean of Theology, we ceased having responsibility for the pre-theology students in Acadia University. Dr. Langley felt that that was not what we needed to be doing. Mm-hmm. We lost that contact, and it even came to the point that we often did not know who the pre-theology students were in the university. So the complexion of the college changed in that sense, that we were now bringing in students from all over Canada, and a few from the United States and a few from abroad. Also, the very fact that we could go from 30 students to 100 students made a great deal of difference in terms of logistics. It also made life more interesting.
In your own teaching career, I've heard people say that Cherry not only taught, he preached his subject sometimes. Did you have favorites? What were your favorite courses and your approach to those courses?
I probably enjoyed teaching my little course in Christian ethics, which was the biblical introduction to Christian ethics. It was not a philosophical understanding of ethics. I probably enjoyed that as much or more than any other course that I taught, maybe just because that has to do with the everyday living of the Christian life. But I dearly loved teaching systematic theology. I know it comes as a shock to most people that anybody could be excited about teaching systematic theology, and I think when they say I was preaching it, what they're really getting at is that I was enthusiastic about the subject and enjoyed teaching it. I did speak too loud. That may be what they had in mind as well, but it was a very I loved teaching. I always missed the pastorate, but I loved teaching, enjoyed it very, very much. I think the fact that I had been a pastor before I was a teacher meant that I was always a pastor at the same time I was a teacher. the thing I guess I enjoyed most about teaching anyway was the students. I didn't, in terms of the deanship, I didn't enjoy records and all that stuff, but I did enjoy students. And when you are the dean, students will come to you with a supposedly academic question which takes 10 minutes, and then the next hour is spent dealing with the real reason they came. And the very fact that you gain the confidence of students and they can tell you anything and talk to you about anything, know you will understand and that you will not reject them and that will go no further, that was a most rewarding experience. In fact, the word got out that there was a dean up there at the Divinity College that would listen to students. Consequently, I was often listening to students who were not our students.
Yeah. During your years in the churches of Atlantic Canada, you've lived through quite a bit of our history. I'm just wondering what kind of changes that you have sensed over the last almost 40 years now in terms of the development of the churches and thrust.
I always find it difficult to talk about that subject because I came into our Baptist life here as one from the outside. Okay. I do not like for people who come in from the outside to tell people how to do things or how things ought to be done. I've been tremendously happy in our Baptist convention. I've enjoyed being involved in some of its work. I've been very supportive of the convention and of its institutions ever since I have been here. One of the things that I think I have seen develop, I think I can safely say this without appearing to be impinging upon my right to say something. I think I have seen the convention come together better than it was in '57 when I first came here. I think there's a better fellowship within the convention today than there was at that time. And it is certainly true that there's a more universal support and acceptance of Acadia Divinity College now than there was of the School of Theology when I came in '57.
Dr. Cherry, if I can follow that up a little bit, I think one of the reasons why you have been so broadly accepted is the fact that you've accepted people so broadly. I also know that you have been supportive of both of our educational institutions, Atlantic Baptist College and Acadia Divinity College, in a way that I'm sure perhaps no other single faculty member has been of both institutions in their development. I'm just wondering why you did it the way that you did it.
I think part of that is that I come from a tradition, at least when I knew that tradition, that believed that you support your own institutions. Consequently, when I came here, we had two institutions for which we were responsible, Atlantic Baptist College, and it wasn't called that at the time, but Atlantic Baptist College and Acadia University with its School of Theology. Then later, Acadia Divinity College. These are our institutions. I'm loyal to them, I support them, and pray for them.
During your years in Wolfville, you've been active in the Wolfville Baptist Church. Do you want to talk to us a little bit about what the church has meant in your life and some of the roles that you have played there?
I'm not a member of the Wolfville Baptist Church now because when I retired, soon thereafter, a year later, I was called to be the pastor of the Pastoral United Baptist Church, and so I put my membership there, and it is still there. In fact, I'm still on their staff as their minister of visitation. But I have been serving the Wolfville Baptist Church as their interim minister for the last 13 months, so I've been very much involved in that church as well. All the years that I was a member of that church, from 1957 to 1988, I did not take an active role in the church so far as holding positions being an officer of the church, that kind of thing. I did a few things when I first came, but I soon decided that that was not in the best interest of the church. I think it's important that the people of Wolfville understand that the Wolfville United Baptist Church is the Wolfville Church, not the church of the university, not controlled by the university, and certainly not controlled then by Acadia Divinity College. So I personally, though a lot of my colleagues would not look at it this way, I personally did not think it was wise for me to have places of authority and leadership in the church. But I've been very supportive of the church through the years and loyal in my attendance, that sort of thing.
In the midst of your life, you've also had broader contexts, learned societies, other organizations. What other ones have you been involved in your life and ministry in Atlantic Canada?
Well, of course, by virtue of the fact that I was Dean of Theology at Acadia University, I was involved in the examining council. In fact, I had to lead the questioning in that council for many years. I was involved, and so happens I'm still involved, in the Board of Ministerial Standards and Education of the denomination. Those are the two areas where I've been most involved with the denomination and serving beyond the church in the denomination. I served at one time on their recruiting committee. They don't have one now, but they used to have one. In the town of Wolfville, I was for several years actively involved in the Rotary Club, but finally the demands of the Divinity College were such that I had to give that up. Just this summer I've been invited back into the Rotary Club as an honorary member, which means that I may attend when I please, and I have no responsibility. I enjoy that kind of membership very, very much. In terms of serving Wolfville, I was privileged when the senior citizens home was first being established here to be asked to be on that board, and I think that's one of the more significant things that I've been involved with in terms of service to the community here. I have been involved in learned associations, such as for years I was in the Society of Biblical Literature and Exegesis. I was in the Academy of Religion, which is basically an American organization. I find that my records show that I was a member of the Theological Association here in Canada, but I don't remember ever going to a meeting of that, so I think that must surely be a misnomer. Those are some of the things that I've been involved in.
When the tensions were going on in the 60s and Atlantic Baptist Fellowship began, now, were you part of that in its origin?
Yes, I became a member. I'm not a joiner, but I did become a member of the Atlantic Baptist Fellowship at the time of its founding. Perhaps you will remember at that time there was a move within the convention to impose a statement of faith upon the ministers of the denomination, and they were going to be expected to sign that. Well, that seemed to me so utterly foreign to what I understand Baptist liberty to be about that I thought it was time that somebody somewhere say something to the contrary. At that time, there was discussion of the formation of Atlantic Baptist Fellowship committed to that great principle of freedom, and that has been its primary reason for existence for all along. Consequently, yes, I've been involved in it and supported it.
There's one other question I want to follow up with. The Wentworth Statement. Remember when John Bartol and several others got together as sort of moderates in the convention and issued that? Do you remember the impact that had on our convention? Because after that, controversy seemed to disappear quite quickly.
I don't remember the particulars of that at all, but I think it is true that that controversy pretty well has faded into the past, and I don't think there's the kind of tension between so-called, and I don't like titles or designations, conservatives on the one side and those more open on the other side. I do really think that that no longer exists. And certainly so far as the Atlantic Baptist Fellowship is concerned, it's just a group of like-minded people who get together for fellowship. It sees itself as cooperating with the convention and supporting the convention. It's certainly not. I know that some people think it's an anti-convention organization, but it never was, and it is not today.
Since your retirement, you have been involved in pastoral ministry at Perot.
Yes.
And with great joy of the people, as well as yourself.
My support.
Tell us a little bit about that church, what it was like when you went to it, and some of the things that happened there.
Well, it was one of the, it turned out to be one of the happiest interludes in my whole life. To begin with, remember I told you in an earlier interview that I felt called to be a country preacher, and the very best prepared country preacher I could possibly be. Well, after all these years, I finally realized my ambition, and I became a country pastor of the Perot United Baptist Church about 3 miles out of Canning. It's a wonderful community. It is mixed. It's a mixed community. Some people live on. They all live in a rural area, but some of them work on their farms, and some of them work at other work. They're school teachers and professional people. It's a very interesting congregation. You ask what things were like when I went and how things had changed. Well, when I went there, I think the size of our worshiping congregation was about 60. When I left there, it was about 100 to 120, something like that. They hadn't had any baptisms for a few years. We had several baptisms, several additions by letter or transfer. We needed more space. We were able to build an addition to the vestry, which has made the place far more commodious than it was before. I did enjoy wonderful support with the people. Every pastorate I've ever had, I've had wonderful deacons. I don't like the jokes that I hear in some circles about deacons or the relationship between deacons and their pastors, because my relationship to my board of deacons and everywhere I've been has been such a rewarding experience. But my board of deacons in Perot was very, very supportive, and the people generally were. It was just a joy from beginning to end.
Yeah. Dr. Terry, ministry has obviously brought you a good deal of joy. I wonder if you could tell us some of the people who have influenced you most in your spiritual pilgrimage.
I would have to start with my mother, I think. I've already spoken, though, about the influence of my home. Then secondly, I think I remember with a great appreciation some of the people, especially in the Sunday school where I grew up as a boy. I'm still indebted to those people, not only for what they taught, but who they were, and the fact that they believed in me and supported me. I've mentioned the first pastor I can ever remember, who was also influential in getting me to go to Ouachita Baptist University. He had a very positive influence in my life. Another person that influenced me a great deal was the head of the English department at Ouachita. He was a most remarkable and able man. He was able to frighten most of his students within an inch of their lives. But he did something for me that I think no adult had ever really done before. He had this approach that when you went into the class, he asked you if you were prepared or unprepared. If you said unprepared, you weren't called on to recite. If you said prepared, you might be called on to recite. If you said you were prepared and you were called on to recite and muffed it, you were in real trouble. In fact, you got some minus marks for the day. Well, the first time he called on me, in fear and trembling, I did my best to answer him. Then he said, "Why?" Well, that was the first time in my life, I think, that any adult had ever paid me the compliment of suggesting that maybe I could have a valid reason for what I'd just done or said. I tell people I got up off the floor and dusted myself off, and I tried to answer him. And he looked me straight in the eye again and said, "Why?" to the answer. Well, from that day on, I had tremendous admiration and respect for that man. Did a major under him. Wound up with the highest average in his department, and by virtue of that was president of the English Honor Society, that kind of thing. So he had a very positive influence on me. Not so much Christian influence, though he was a Christian, practicing Christian, but he had a lot to do with my development. Another person, of course, who had a great deal of influence on me was the Reverend Dr. Dale Moody, who was head of the Department of Systematic Theology at Southern Baptist Seminary. I did my doctorate under his guidance, and he has influenced me a great deal. Those are some of the people that have influenced me a great deal. Then I would say that my colleagues here at the university, and particularly on the Faculty of Theology, have been a very positive influence in my life. Not only have people influenced me, though, if this kind of thing is of interest, little things have been tremendously important in my own spiritual development. For example, a long time ago, the saying of St. Augustine, "I was made for thee, O God, and my soul will not rest until it finds its rest in thee," that has been a fundamental conviction in my life throughout all the years, and also in my relationship with other people. The fact that whether they know it or not, they too were made for God, and they will not find their rest until they find rest in Him. For that reason, I feel I can share the gospel with any person, whether they know they need it or not. They were made for Him, and they won't realize what God intended them to be apart from their relationship to Him.
Dr. Terry, in your Canadian experience in the university, you served under several presidents.
Yes.
Any comments that you'd like to make about Dr. Kirkconnell and then Dr. Beveridge, in
Yes.
particular, the early ones for you?
I appreciated Dr. Kirkconnell very much. I was always in a certain awe of Dr. Kirkconnell. The fact that he could read and work in so many languages was a matter of utter amazement to me. I found him, though, very supportive and very cooperative, very gracious and very kind. I enjoyed being in his home, enjoyed being with his family, enjoyed his wife very much. Hope Kirkconnell was a lovely woman. In fact, when I came up to be interviewed in May of 1957, that was the last weekend in May, you wouldn't believe it, but it was warm enough that on Saturday afternoon they took me out to Delhaven Beach for a picnic. Then they took me up to the look-off, and as I looked out across the valley, I tell people that's what made up my mind right then and there, that I would love to live here.
Dr. Terry, thank you so much for being with us for this afternoon and for this interview. We appreciate your being willing to share so much of yourself so that we might know you much better. Thank you.
Thank you.